members across the world finding out how they are dealing with the coronavirus pandemic. In this interview, I'm talking with Susan Ginsberg, who is a self-employed consultant to the relocation industry. You're a member based in New York. Please bear in mind this was recorded on Wednesday, April the 1st, and so therefore some of the figures that we talk about may now be out of date. Hello and welcome back to our series of interviews with Euro members across the world during these extraordinary times that we find ourselves in. It gives me great pleasure to introduce you to Susan Ginsberg. If you don't know Susan, Susan has been part of our industry, an instrumental part of our industry for, I'm not going to say it, but in terms of your expertise, you bring years of expertise to the mobility industry, and it's a great pleasure, as it always is, to talk to you. I just want to also point out, Susan is one of our primary trainers on the MIM program. She developed a fantastic module for us, Achieving Business Growth in Uncertain Times, and I have been putting that out in the bulletin, saying to people, if you have the time to do it, now's the time to find out how to achieve business growth in an uncertain time, because this is an uncertain time. Susan, it's wonderful to have you here. Thank you for taking the time to do this. My first question would be, I know where you live, maybe other people don't. Can you tell us what's happening right now in the US and where you are?
Yeah, first, hello, Dom. It's always wonderful to see you, and thank you so much for contacting me. Yes, we live about 30 minutes outside of New York City, which I'm sure, as everyone knows, is the epicenter of this pandemic. This morning, I read on the news that the UN Secretary General said this pandemic is the greatest challenge since World War II. And in New York today, there are over 76,000 cases and close to 2,000 deaths, sadly, in the tri-state area. I will say, kudos, major kudos to all of the first responders, the healthcare workers, the caregivers, the truck drivers, the grocery store checkers, for all that they're doing in their part to be kind and compassionate and to do their part in keeping us safe, and for the healthcare workers, saving lives. We live in a little tiny village called Ardsley, and it was made famous because George Washington actually slept here. I live on a little tiny street named after a real Captain Honeywell. And like I said, about 30 miles outside of New York City. And as of Monday, it was reported there were 17 cases in our little tiny village, which is 1 square mile. What we are doing as a country is sharing good news. I personally and my family is trying to watch as little television and news as possible. I will allocate certain times of the day to read the news because I do feel a responsibility to stay informed and try to manage the rest of my day in a proactive and positive way. It's myself and my husband are in our house, and actually our son, who was in medical school in a third world country, the school was quite responsible and chartered flights to get the students off the island. And that is before there were any known cases, and now there are 9 cases on this island, this country, and a third world country. So we certainly wish them the best, and they are also all on lockdown. So our son is living with us. So yeah, it's, the situation is grim. Dom, as you and I talked earlier, we all know of people who have either tested positive and have ended up in the hospital. Fortunately, they have all gotten through that very difficult 2-week period. Others have contacted their doctors and said, these are my symptoms, and the doctor says, then quarantine yourself in your house. I will say it's our local grocery stores have been just fantastic. I fall into the category called seniors.
Okay.
And
I don't believe you.
And I was at our local store, which is I could walk to it when the weather's nice. I actually walked to the store to get some exercise, and they open from 8 for 1 hour just for seniors,
Right.
And have us, stand 6 feet apart. They give each of us gloves. If anybody asks for extra gloves, they very graciously hand out extra gloves. They, spray the carts,
right.
And now all the grocery stores have plexiglass dividers to
separate.
Separate you from the cashier,
yeah.
with a little tiny window for your credit card. So, whoever thought that going to the grocery store would be a stressful experience. It's, taking, I will say, on a family and a personal level, we are doing what we can to stay connected. As I mentioned earlier, Dom, we have also our son and daughter-in-law and 2 granddaughters are in New Jersey. So they're about an hour away from us. And I have almost daily virtual play dates with my 4.5-year-old granddaughter, where we read books or we color in our respective homes. And this afternoon, we're each going outside with a nature box, that we will each decorate and collect nature for our nature box.
That's really sweet.
So, yeah.
Yeah, you did. No, I was just going to ask. So you were talking. It was interesting just hearing about the grocery stores and what the response has been in terms of what restrictions you're living under. I'm assuming that is state by state, and what's been put in place in New York State, given that the scale of the infection rate is so high.
Well, in New York State, before the president extended the countrywide, stay at home.
And that's been extended to when now?
To the 30th of April.
Okay, yeah.
So that will fall well beyond, the Easter holiday, Passover.
Yeah.
And, from there, we will all have to make decisions as to how we celebrate these important holidays. In this area, and I live in a county called Westchester County, there are over 9,000 cases, and Governor Andrew Cuomo has been I'll take no prisoners approach, meaning being very blunt, very direct, very clear on a daily basis what we have to do as a state. And I think he's been incredibly clear and collaborative, saying to the tri-state area, the governors in New Jersey and Connecticut, we need to all work together to share information, to be proactive, to advocate for as many medical supplies as we need, and also call out to other states who have not taken as drastic a measure and say, this will come to you. So we advise you, and in some cases we plead with you to require that your communities stay indoors, maintain social distancing, and I like to call it social solidarity and physical
That's a nice way of putting it. I like that. Physical distancing, social solidarity. I like that.
Yeah. Because we're doing what we can. Thank you to you, Dom, and Tad and Yura for having these sessions where we can maintain connections.
It's just so important. I'm going to come on. I want to ask you about that a bit later. So in terms of, you have to stay inside. Can you go outside for a walk? Can you get exercise? You said you could walk to the grocery store. Can you still do that?
Yes,
okay.
I can still exercise. I've been walking in our local area. My husband's been hiking every morning.
Great.
I sometimes just put my sneakers on and run up and down the steps in my house. And just the other day, my Zumba instructor has now transitioned to online Zumba classes. So literally closing the door, putting on the exercise equipment. And, the silver lining in this is we all as a people, as a community, an industry, all industries are finding other ways to be proactive, productive, helpful, and again, stay connected.
And tell me, in terms of New York State, can you get together with other people, or are you limited in group sizes, or household only? How's that working?
At this point, it's household only.
Okay.
It used to be no groups larger than 50.
Okay.
And that was a couple of weeks ago. And
Right.
as you know, this pandemic has spread so rapidly.
So fast.
Now it is you are not to socialize with anyone.
Okay.
With anyone.
Right.
We on our street, we will stand in each other's, stand across the street and stand in our driveway or sit on our stoop and wave hello and have conversation. And we'll share resources, information. We'll update each other. But we are at this point not allowed to socialize face to face.
Interesting, because that's a further step than most of Europe. I think Spain is in a similar place right now. Certainly here in the UK, it's groupings of households or two people who are not in the same household. You have to stay.
Oh, two. Okay.
I can still see my neighbour and go for a walk, and that's it. So the response, it seems to me, by the authorities in the tri-state area has been swift and efficient, it sounds.
It's been very swift. As a matter of fact, Governor Cuomo has now produced a series of commercials and radio spots and ads, online ads, saying, if you don't do this, there will be fines. As a matter of fact,
Right.
Mayor de Blasio in New York City, it was reported this morning, said if you congregate in a park, and that was being done, and unfortunately that caused further spread and raised anxiety, you could be fined up to $500 USD.
Mm-hmm.
And so the New York State, New York City, Westchester County, where in this county there are over 9,000 cases that have tested positive, and those are the ones that
those have been tested. Those aren't reported. Tested.
Correct. Tested positive. So of course there are many cases where doctors are saying, you have the symptoms, stay home. Don't even bother being tested. Stay home. You may not get a test, and like we were saying earlier, if you get a test, that doesn't mean you will get the results on a timely basis. You could test negative and still have the virus.
Yeah.
So be proactive, and at this point there will be a consequence, a financial penalty, if you socialize with anyone. So, at this point, socializing while you're standing in line at the grocery store and turning around and chatting, or turning around and chatting with someone who's in line and he or she may have a mask on, we will all have gloves on, is the best we can do face to face, other than those in your household.
Yeah, absolutely. So interesting. I was talking yesterday with Marie O'Neill and Nadine Hopkins at Executive Expatriate in Dubai. And they told me that the Dubai, because there's a very low rate of infection at the moment, but they're actually sterilizing the entire city every night. There's an army of cleaning people going around sterilizing the city. And I just thought that's phenomenal. And that's something that I'm guessing just in a city the size of New York, London, it's just not possible. There's too many people involved. So what I wanted to ask you was, you are a self-employed consultant to our industry. I'm assuming your business continuity planning was fairly easy to implement.
Yes, in a way, yes, in a way. I mean, as a consultant, my business is based on, my ability to foster and nurture credible, trusting, as a trusted strategic advisor, is to engage with organizations and, be clear about deliverables. I have been very fortunate the last 18 months or so to have, been engaged and been really honored and flattered. Um, you know, right now, the organizations that have engaged me have been very clear and said, you're part of our family.
Yeah.
We love you. We're really happy with you. Today, we cannot engage you.
Yeah.
Because our business, we have no business, or we have limited business, and we need to be proactive. And this is not the time, nor is it any time, in my view, to ever be mercenary, and certainly this is not the time to do that. I am currently working on developing another learning module for a global trade organization, so that's keeping me engaged and
Great.
very excited about that. And so, the contingency plan is know that there are peaks and valleys as a consultant, and making the choice to be a consultant. There already was a degree of risk.
Sure.
And it's something that I'm relatively comfortable with.
It's just so frustrating that, and everyone I've spoken to has kind of said the same thing. I was speaking to Anna Kaval in Australia yesterday, and she told me, they just she had a big promotion. She became the managing director. They did a takeover. So, all of the business planning that went into all of those major strategic decisions. Well, this wasn't part of it. I mean,
right.
And the same for you, right? You make a business plan about how you're going to go forward with a consultancy, and then something like this happens. However well we plan our business contingencies, no one can plan for this.
Exactly. No one can plan for this. However, it's interesting. I read on LinkedIn, and I can send it to you if you're interested. Yeah. There's an article that just came out in The Economist, and the author of that was actually referred to by an author. Her name is Andrea Bonim Blanc, and she wrote a book called Gloom to Boom. Ooh. And I thought it was absolutely brilliant. And it we talked earlier about the silver lining. What will happen as a result of this? We're all kind of going inward, and we're reflecting on what's important in our life, in our families, in our community, in our world. Is companies are going, the companies that invest in resilience, in programs that nurture and maintain resilience and endurance, will survive and will thrive. And it is incumbent upon leaders today and tomorrow to look at their teams, look at their talent, and say, okay, how can I role model those attributes? Endurance, resilience, trustworthiness, collaboration.
It's so interesting. I mean, for those of you who don't know, and obviously Susan and I know each other very well, I have been a passionate advocate of conscious capitalism for half a decade now, and the processes whereby corporations contribute to society. And I feel that, like you said, one of the silver linings of this crisis is that those values we are going to come out of this with those values even more firmly entrenched than maybe they are now. I wanted to ask you, do you know, again, you're working as a self-employed consultant. They've just released a government funding program for people in that kind of situation in the UK. If you need to meet mortgage payments and that kind of thing. Has there been any tax relief, financial aid in the US for somebody in your position who is reliant on your own income? You don't have a company behind you furloughing you or anything like that. Is there anything that you can rely on, or not yet?
A $2 million aid or $2 trillion aid package was approved last week with, of course, the usual fanfare in our U.S. government. It's still, the information is still being, clarified. There are those that say this is not enough for people who live day to day, month to month. This is the 1st of April, where a number of many people have to pay their rent.
That's right, of course.
And fortunately, we are not in that position. We own our home,
right.
And but yeah, I don't have the benefit of health insurance through another company. It's my own health insurance.
Yeah.
Very close to being at that age where the government will be covering for that. But
can I ask you about that? Sorry to digress, but because that's something that I think a lot of people in Europe, based in Europe, don't fully understand how the healthcare system is administered. So once you reach what would be, quotes, retirement age, are you covered under a governmental healthcare scheme? And is that state by state or national?
It's national.
Okay.
Admittedly, I'm not really articulate about it. At age 62, you are able to claim Social Security. And that's a national program.
Okay.
However, the longer you wait, you have to exercise it at age 70. The longer you wait, the more the monthly payout will be. So, I have not exercised that.
So it's like you're building up credit almost.
Exactly. You're building up credit. There's also Medicare, and once you reach age 65, you pay a minimal fee based on your last reported income, to the IRS. For your care, your medical care, and for your prescriptions.
Okay.
So getting pretty close.
I don't believe that.
But not there yet. And that is a national program.
Sure.
There are millions of people in this country, from young people to, the elderly, who are rationing their prescriptions. Because they don't have health care, or they can't afford health care, or they're kind of, cutting back on the health care needs they require to feed their family. So, very, very sadly, and this is where, so many of us feel fortunate that there are people who, again, today is the 1st of April. In many cases, that's when the rent is due.
Your rent, yeah, absolutely.
And so, there's a lot of discussion that the U.S. government will have to go back and actually add to this $2 trillion relief package, because now not only are healthcare workers impacted because they can lose their lives, many of them are leaving their families, so other people are providing care and food for the healthcare workers. The restaurant industry, I have a son in the hospitality industry. What will happen to the restaurants? So we're trying on occasion to actually order food to support our local restaurants.
That's great.
Yeah, and takeout, where we will call ahead, we will pay in advance with a credit card, and then we'll wipe down the packages before they come into our home.
Right. It's again, it's just so interesting doing the compare and contrast. And what I'm going to do, over the next few weeks, as we continue these interviews, as time moves forward, we'll come back and talk about these kind of things again. I was talking to Susana Born, our vice president, who's based in Madrid, which has also been, as far as Europe is concerned, one of the major centers of this crisis. And she was telling me that the Spanish government had closed all restaurants, but had put in place a big rescue package for the hospitality industry. and then turned around and told Burger King to reopen, having laid off 122,000 people in Spain, because they need the food to be delivered to people who cannot get out of their houses. So
Exactly.
Governments have to play catch up with, just as much as all of us, we don't really, know from day to day what's going to change. It's just interesting.
You bring up such a great point, Dom, and more states and I believe, or I hope, more countries are finding ways to share practices.
Yeah.
And I think about these wonderful YouTube videos that, you're creating and posting, is to share ideas that where we can learn from each other and help each other, because none of us have a roadmap.
No.
Other than we know we have to maintain physical distancing,
mm-hmm.
and we have to wash our hands, regularly for 20 seconds.
That's right.
Other than that, there is no cure, although we know that cures are, researchers and pharmaceutical companies are rapidly trying to find a cure.
And I don't know about you, but for me, this is 2 weeks since Britain was first put on any kind of restrictions. And that was the day that I remember waking up that morning and going, I don't know what to do. And it was that day, it was talking all day, talking with people, FaceTiming with people, Euro friends and family across the world, my own friends and family. That's what got me through that tough day. That's what's getting all of us through this tough time. Communication and connection, right?
Without question, Dom, is the ability to see someone, the ability, you and I talked last week and you commented, oh, you have lipstick on. I said, you know what? It helps me feel, normal.
Absolutely.
This is somewhat funny, but it's true. There was an article last week in the New York Times that there are now all online videos as to how to provide self-care. Beauty salons are providing color kits for women and for men in some cases to color their hair, go home and color their hair. And so we're all finding ways to stay connected, to have a moment of levity in what is a very difficult situation. I've been sending to my clients resources in the hopes that they'll send them to their clients or to their customers. And as we said earlier, resilience and endurance. The organizations, and this particular article, Dom, talked about large companies, but that theme transcends, as you mentioned, conscious capitalism, transcends well beyond large organizations like Apple and Microsoft and Johnson & Johnson and Novo Nordisk. That applies to mid-sized companies, small companies, independent consultants. Our ability to be resilient, to endure, to take a position where we impact others so they feel hopeful and they feel positive. There was an article in Knowledge of Wharton. I'm a University of Pennsylvania alumna, called Being an Empathetic Strategist. So now is not the time, nor is it ever, in my view, to be mercenary. But think about our ability to demonstrate empathy and compassion toward one another, and think about those implications to your organization, to your team, to each other.
Absolutely, and that's really nice of you to say, and I agree. I think that's where the positivity that's going to get us through this is coming from, and it's that sharing. And I mean, I've been completely humbled, as has Tad, by the response of our industry. Has been phenomenal. We always knew this was an amazing industry. All of us who are in it know it's an amazing industry, but the care and the compassion which members all over the world have shown, first and foremost, to the people who they just brought in to their country, who are not only going through the life change of being relocated to a new place, but now faced with dealing with a crisis like this, away from family, away from friends, away from home, has been inspiring, without doubt.
The Ritz-Carlton in Manhattan has converted their hotel to free housing for healthcare workers.
That's fantastic.
Again, another example of, you think about the Ritz-Carlton, the premium of premium.
Yeah.
Right. Fancy schmancy is they're looking and they're saying, this is what we will do, is to, and I believe those gestures, those authentic gestures, people will remember that.
Absolutely. And that's so interesting you say that, because we had a note through this morning, and Bryony said the same thing to me about an hour ago, from the people who make our app for the conference. It's called Hoover. It's a great app. We love it. We've used it for a few years. It's really super. Without even being contacted by us, they wrote a note to me and Bryony this morning saying, oh, we've just seen a notice that went out saying your conference has been postponed to next year. We just want to let you know we won't be charging you anything. We'll roll the whole thing over. Please confirm the new dates. So that's what we will, like you say, those authentic gestures by Ritz-Carlton, the authentic gesture by the people who make our art, that's never going to be forgotten. When we come out of this, and we will come out of this, there are going to be people who will never forget what certain companies did.
Exactly. Those gestures, that caring,
huge.
Is so key. There's a grocery store within walking distance to my home, and I typically don't go there often unless it's on Senior Day, and it's very expensive.
Okay.
And I forgot to bring my gloves, and so I said, "May I have a pair of gloves?" Not only did he give me a pair of gloves, he said, "Here, take a big bunch, bring them home." And that level of caring, what you the stories that you've shared, the stories that others you've interviewed have shared, are so very meaningful today. John Krasinski actually just launched something, I think it's called SGN, Share Good News. And I was watching it yesterday, and he's very funny. He was one of the actors on the U.S. version of The Office, and he was poking fun at himself, sitting there in his, jacket and tie, and of course saying he had nothing beyond, nothing on beyond, his jacket and tie, and saying, you know what, I'm going to share good news.
Yeah.
So look up SGN, sharing good news.
I'm going to look that up. Thank you. Listen, it's been an absolute pleasure talking to you, and we have shared good news, and we will continue to do that. I'd love to come back to you in a few weeks' time. All I can say, from my heart, and I know from the hearts of the Euro family, we're all going through a terrible time. We've all seen what's going on in New York, and yet again, the people of New York will rise to this terrible challenge and come out of it with the indomitable spirit that they've always shown through crises. So, Susan, it's been a pleasure. Thank you so much. Stay well, stay strong, stay safe.
Yes, and thank you again. And loved your virtual hugs on the...
yes.
Yes, virtual hugs.
A virtual hug, absolutely. Thank you again. It's been lovely to catch up with you. Take care, Susan.
Thank you, Dom.
Bye.